And we're now on Daf Chof Aleph Amid Beis. Uraminu, let's raise a contradiction from a brisa. A man declares Yadi Nazir. My arm, my hand should be a Nazir. Viragli, or alternatively, he declares my leg, Nazir, should be a Nazir. Lo Omer Klum. This is called an Aver She'ein HaNeshama Tluya Bo, because the human organism could survive without an arm, without a leg. But if he says Roshi Nazira, my head should be a Nazir, or Kvedi Nazir, my liver should be Nazir, Harez and Nazir, Zaklal. Dover Shaneshama Tluya Bo, Harez and Nazir. A vital organ, like for example the head or the liver, without which you cannot survive, that's an neshama, that's an aver shaneshama tluya bo, and therefore his nazirus is chal on his entire body. From that aver, it spreads to his entire body. However, if he was mekabel nazirus on an aver she'ein neshama tluya bo, for example, yad or regel, then there's no din of greira. There's no din that the nazirus spreads from his hand or from his leg to the entire body. And now the Gemara is asking the following kasha. If a person says pi kipiv, sorry kisaro, he's a nazir. That's what the Mishnah establishes. This is a neshama she'ein, an aver she'ein ha-neshama tluya bo. So if he's mekabel nazirus only on his yad, or only on his regel, or only on his peh, if let's say Chashom, his lips were injured badly, or if his hair was taken out, in any case he survives, and therefore it's not a Nazirus. Rabbi Yehuda wants to reconcile the steer between the Bryce and our Mishnah. To Omar Hachi, he didn't just say Pi Kipiv, but he said Ye Ase Pi Kipiv Miyayin. He added the word Yayin, or Usiari Kisaro Mi Lagos, that my hair should be like his hair, the one who said Nazir, already Nazir, that I should not be able to cut my hair. So he's not prohibiting his peh or his seir exclusively, but rather his intention is to say that he's a Nazir like his friend, and therefore he's enjoined from drinking wine, he's enjoined from cutting his hair. The Mishnah says that if a wife declares already Nazira, V'shama Ba'alav Yomar, Fani, and her husband is very happy about it, and he says, I also want to join the bandwagon. I also want to be a Nazir. Is then, Eino Yochel Hafer, he cannot be made for the Nazirus of his wife. And the simple understanding of our Mishnah is that by indicating that he's happy with his wife's Kabbal's Nazirus, that becomes a Hakomas HaNeder. But the Gemara has the following suffix: Baal miyaker okar oduma megis gayas. Now the Gemara wants to know what is the definition of hafaras neder. When a husband is made for his wife's neder, is it miyaker okar? He removes the neder from its very inception retroactively, as if she had never taken the neder. Or is it possible that it's not okay the neder l'mafreya, but rather it's megis gayas? It only cuts the neder in half, mikan ulahabu. And that means that from this moment and on, the neder is batel, but up until this point in time, the neder is kayan. And l'may nafgemina, what's the difference between the akir okar or megis gayas? It's going to be an nafgemina for our case, in our Mishnah. L'isha shenadra min Nazir, his wife accepted Nazirus v'shama chaverta. Now we have another case. And one of our friends heard about it. V'omravandi, so Tokidei Dibra of her, let's say, this, we'll call it Rachel Leah, Tokidei Dibra of Rachel's declaration already Nazira, Leah declared Vandi. Shama Baila Shal Rishona, now Rachel, the first one, her husband heard about the Nazirus for Heferlo. Now the question is, what impact is that going to have on Leah, who is Makabel with the word Makabelis with Vani? Amrit mi'akir akir, if we're going to assume that when Yaakov, the husband of Rachel, is made for the neder of his wife is Okel Mafreya. So it's as if Rachel had never taken a neder at all. Is therefore he Nami Yisri. Now Leah, who said Vani, her Kabbal's Naziris goes down the tube as well. It dissolves, it dissipates, because her Vani is being matris the neder on Rachel, but Rachel never had such a neder because the Baal, through his Afar, was Oker Es HaNeder Mikaro. But if on the other hand, you're going to tell me, Megas Gaius, that the impact of Hafara is only Mikan Lahaba, but until this moment in time, the neder was Kayam, is then Ishtri Chavrat Asir. Even though now, through Hafara Sabal, the status of Rachel from now on would be that her Naziris is completely gone through Hafar Sabal. But as far as Leah is concerned, since she was matfis by reciting Vani onto Rachel, and at that moment in time, Rachel was indeed a Nazira, and she'll get credit for being a Nazira until that point, is Asira. Therefore, Leah's Kabbalah's Naziris through Vani is still binding and still valid. Because at the moment that she said Vani, the Naziris of Rachel, the Rishona, was still Kayemes, it was still alive and well. And therefore, that fossa should be Chal. Now, one thing that I'm confused about is if you hold Baal Megiz Gaiz, then does she have to bring the Karbonos of a Nazira? I suspect that she doesn't, but I couldn't find anybody who says anything about it. Let me just look in one more place here, and if you could look in your Mefarshim. Let's see. So he points out here that a Chacham is certainly Oker Es HaNeder Meikara, but Afar Sabal is not necessarily identical with Heter Chacham. Chacham is basically matir through toes, or Pesach, which is like toes. Afara might be Megiz Gaius. Just not sure what her status is. Is she considered a Nazira until that point? I doubt it. Well, one thing I see here, he says that if she violated her Nazirus and she drank wine, or she nitmila mesim, so she gets malchus for that, because at that point she was still a Nazir if we hold Megiz Gaius. Oh, here's something that possibly could give us a clue. He says the following in the name of Tosfos. If she was nitma'ah b'shogeg before the Baal was made for her neder, so if you hold mi akrei l'mafreya, then she never took a neder, then first sure she doesn't bring an olas ofi osham, like a Nazir shenitma. Let's call Megiz Gaiz chayeves lahavi olas ha'of be'osham. So I'm going to, but that's not the same as what I was asking. I was asking if she has to bring the 3 behemos of Siyum Nazirus, because she never really finished on Nazirus. I don't know. Somebody is obviously going to address this issue. I'm almost sure she would not bring those karbonos. So the Gemara says now, how do you finally determine the essence or the definition of Hafar Sabal? Is it L'mafreya or is it Mikan L'Havatoshma? I'm going to bring you a proof from our Mishnah. This is what I anticipated before, but I jumped the gun a little bit. She said Hareini Nazir. Shama Baila Vani. And her husband heard it and said Vani. So he was matfis his Nazirus in her Nazirus. Eno Yochel Hafer. He cannot be mefer her Nazirus. Now, why is this? So here we have to introduce a principle that's derived in the Gemara in Chagiga from the pasuk Lo Yachal Dvaro, Hu Eno Yochel Echal Dvaro, Ulahater Es Nidro Biatzmo, Avol Chacham Matir. Okay, then? So that is going to give us a clue as to why in the Mishnah, he, the Baal, who said Vani onto his wife's Kabbalah, cannot be made for her Nazirus. Why? Because if he would be made for her Nazirus, and he himself was matfis his Nazirus onto her by saying Vani, then in effect, he would now being made for his own Nazirus. And we said that hu eino mefer, right? Lo yachal dvaro. So this makes 100% sense if you hold that Hafara works on Mafreya. Since Hafara works on Mafreya, therefore he's being matfis. If the Hafara would be valid, he's being matfis onto a non-existent Nazirus. But V'isal Kedaitu Baal Megis Gayis, if up until the moment of Hafara, her neder remains valid and binding, and with his hafari can only be matir the neder mikan lahaba. That's called Megis Gayis. Is leifer liishtoba hu litzar. He can be mefer his wife's nazirus. He will remain in a state of Isa nazirus because at the moment that he says vani, she was still a nazira, and his hatfasa was chal, even though subsequently he was mefer her nazirus. But at the time that he said vani, he was matfis in a nazira. We have to conclude from this that a Baal is oker his wife's nedel mafreya, and therefore if he would be made for his nazirus, his wife's nazirus, then memela he would be made for his own nazirus because he was matfis in her, and therefore we apply the principle ein on the b'yochel lahafer nidrei atzma. And the Gemara rejects. Lo. I could always assume and maintain that Megis Gayis, that the Hafar Sabal is only Mikan Ulahaba. And Bedinu to Leifer law, and according to the strict letter of the halacha, he could be Mefer Har Nidar, Har Nazirus. Fahainu Taima to Lomotzi Mefer. And if you ask me, why is he not able to be made for it? It's because of Hakama, for a whole different reason. Keva the Amar Vandi, once he said, Vani, I also want to be matfis my Nazirus and your Nazirus. That's a Gili Das, that he's very happy with her Nazirus. It's tantamount to his declaration of Mekuyim Lach. And therefore, once a Baal was Mekayim, the neder of his wife, and here he does it by implication, since he says Vani, is therefore he can no longer be made for his neder, her neder. Eli mitchal akamaso motzi mefer. But the din is that hakama lends itself to hataras chacham. You could be shoel on your hakama and completely nullify your hakama. That's because if you recall from what we learned in Nedarim, that hakama is like a neder itself, and you could be shoel on a neder. Now, if he would now go ahead and be mitchel al hakamaso, he would be shoel eitzel chacham on his hakama, then the hakama is non-existent, and then he could be mefer. But he lo motzi mefer. If he was not shoel on his hakama, then the hakama remains intact, and by implication, by declaring vani, he has granted his approval to her nazirus, and therefore the hakama makes it impossible for him to be mefer. So the only possibility of being mefer now would be if he was shoel on his hakama. Tashma, let's bring a raya from the Mishnah later on in Daf Chav Dalet. Isha shenodra ben Nazir v'frishas behemta. After she accepted upon herself Nazirus. Immediately before her husband even knew about it, she designated 3 behemos that she has to bring as a carbon for the Siyum HaNazirus. That means Kivsa Lechatos Keves Liola V'Ayla Shlomim V'Yakach Hefer L'Bayla. Now, what's going to be here? If the Baal is Mefer L'Mafreya, then she was never a Nazira, and therefore these Hafrashos are animals that cannot be brought as a carbon. And especially, let's emphasize the Kivsa Lechatos, because Lechatos ain't a bowl in Nedava. So that option of a Nedava you don't even have. So what does it say in the Mishnah later on? It says, V'yakach hefer l'bayla. What do we do with these karbanos? And it depends. What were the funds that she used to purchase these behemoths? Im shelo. Now the halacha is that if a married woman is obligated karbanos, her husband is responsible to purchase from his own money her karbanos. So she went ahead and she did what she thought was rightfully hers, and she took money out of his bank account, and she purchased these behemoths for the purpose of chatos, ola, and shlomim. Is teitze v'tira ba'eder. Now here you have to be very careful. When I first read this, Rabbi, I thought it meant yeroal she'istoyev. No. Teitze v'tira ba'eder means that these animals are chulin. They have no kedushas carbon at all. And the reason for that is because I can't be magdish a behema for a carbon with the monies of somebody else, unless that person commissions me to do so. But in the absence of his rishus, I can't be magdish a carbon, a behema with his money. And now when the Baal was mefer her nedarim, her nazirus, then she was never a nazirus at all. She was never obligated in a carbon. She certainly did not have therefore rishus to be mafresh these animals as a carbon. But says the Mishnah, im shalah haisa, if she had private ownership over monies, let's say, for example, somebody gave her a gift, almanas, that it should not be acquired by her husband, so she has her own money, or she inherited from her father, whatever it might be, and then she bought these 3 behemos and she was mafresh them as karbonos. So what's going to happen now when we find out that lo and behold, she was not a Nazira because her Baal was Mefer, and we're going to assume now that Hafara is L'Mafreya. Now we're going to split up the 3 behemoths into 2 categories. One category is the Kivsa L'Chatos, stop. Then you have the Keves Liola V'Ayla Shlomim. Now Ola and Shlomim are karbonos that are ba'im b'nidava, whereas Chatos can never come b'nidava. And therefore, a chatos, that kivsa, which she designated for a chatos, is tamus. That means we lock it up and we starve it to death. It cannot be brought as a korban nedava. It can't be brought as a chatos because she was never a nazira. As far as the other 2 animals, right, the keves, the ola, and the Eilish Shlomim, they are both Bar B'Nidav, so we can solve that problem. But as far as the animal that was designated as Chatos, Chatos can't be brought on the Mizbeach, and we have no solution to the problem of the Chatos. It's not Bar B'Nidav. So the Gemara says this makes sense. Wait a second. What I meant to say is that the Reisha makes a lot of sense, that if it was his money, then Teitzi V'Tira B'Eder, the Hakdosh is not Chal. But now it's her money. Now, if it's her money, and she bought the Chatos, then there was never a Kedushas Chatos Chal, because the Baal is Mefer L'Mafreya. Frek the Gemara of Yisal Kedak the Baal Meikar Okaris Mafkia Nazirus L'Mafreya is Tepek L'Chulin. Then that animal that she designated as a Chatos doesn't have to go to death, but rather it becomes Chulin. Tafar Sabal clarifies for us that she was never chayiv in the schatos, and therefore there's no hafrasha at all. It was never chal. And in the footnote, he quotes a Gemara later on at Daf Lamed Aleph, Hamafresh behemo lekarban naziruso, v'yakach nishal ala nazirus etzel chacham, eina behema kedosha klal el lav shmamino the Baal megiz gayis. That it's not that the Baal is oker the nazirus l'mafreya, but it's only bittul mikan lahaba. So therefore, when she was mafresh the behemoth achatos, that hagdosh is chal, because at that moment in time she was in a zira, and that's a fact that we can't change. Because even when the Baal is mayfair her nazirus later, it's only mikan lahaba. But at the time that she was mafresh it, she was in a zira, she was obligated in the carbon, and that's why the hagdosh is chal. Now she's no longer in a zira because the Baal was megiz gayis, and the Karba now Chatus has to go Lemisa. So Gemara rejects it. That the Baal is through his Hafara is Mafkia, the Neder, the Naziris may Kara Lemafreya. Ahainu Taima. And if you'll ask me why is the Chatus Lemisa, L'chor should be a Chatus L'chulin, and there was never Akdasha. Kevin de Lo Tzricha Kapara. So this has to do with Halach L'Moshe V'Sinai. There are 5 categories of a Korban Chatas that go L'Misa, and one of them is Mesu Baleho. Let's say Ruvain owns a Korban, he was mafresh behema as a Chatas, and then Ruvain dies. Then the Chatas also has to die because it can no longer be mechaper on the Mizbeach for Ruvain. He's gone already. And here, in our case, we have a din of chatas lemisa. Why? Because the whole essence of a korban chatas is kapara. Now, the Baal was mefer ha nazirus, and that removes the nazirus meikara. So that behema, the Gemara says, becomes a chatas shemesu baleh. He says the following. If you look in Tmura Daf Tesvav, Adam shehifrish behema lechatosu meis kodem sheikr mosa chatos tomus. V'hi achas michamesh chatos shalamanu mi'aloch l'moshe misina shedina lemisa kimavur sham v'Tmura Daf Chof Aleph Amid Beis. Now we want to know, why isn't the chatos yotzeis lechulin, since the Baal was oker the nazirus l'mafreya, and the Akdosh shouldn't be chal. V'yena chatas yotzis l'chulin, afim a Baal mi'ikar aker v'nispar l'mafreya shoysa afrosha b'tos, ki mikol makom, b'shah shefrisha, at the moment that she designated the korban, adayin hoysa tzricha kapara. Why? Because she was in a zira at the time that she was mafresh the korban. And therefore, there's kedushas chatos that's chal on the korban. At the end, the Baal was meifir and nekar haneder meikara. Nikomakom ein ze nechshav ke hafrosha b'tos. Why not? Kevan sheba osos man shefrisha hoysa chayeves. Eladin be'mezu ke chatos shemesu b'aleh. Very difficult. In my humble opinion, again, maybe I shouldn't say this in a Daf Yomi shir, but I think what's going on here is that Lemafreya means Mikano Lahaba Lemafreya. From now on, what's relevant henceforth, we could consider it Lemafreya. But what's relevant to the time before there was an Akira, maybe before that first Baal, that's not called a Tos. That Akdosha is Chal. Excuse me for just 1 minute here. So Loyola Meimelecha Baal Maker Okar. But as far as her original Akdosha, at the time that she was in Nazir before the Baal was Mayfair, that Hakdosh is Chal, and therefore it's a Chatos Shemesu Balea Tomus. Hoshma. Now we have a Mishnah later on Daf Chav Gimel. Isha Shenadra min Nazir, and she violated her Nazirus. V'haisa Shosa Yayin U'Mitame L'Mesim Harezu Sofegas Arbam. She gets Malchus. She violated a lav min haTorah. Hechidon. Ilem Delo Hefel Baal Tzrich L'Meima. If the Mishnah is talking about a case where the Baal was not made for a Nazirus, then why should she be different than any Nazir who violates his Nazirus with Shtiyas Yayin or Tumas Mes, and he's Chayiv Malchus? El Pshita de Hefel Baal. It must be a case in which the Baal was Mefer Hanadar. Visal Kedai to Baal Miaker Aker, if the Hafaras Baal is Oker, the Neder. In this case, the Nazirus Lamafreya is a Maiso Fegas Arboim. Why should you get Malchus Alav? Shema Mina Shabal Megas Gaius. And the Gemara rejects it. Liola Memelecha Baal Miaker Okar. It's only Mikan Ulahaba. I'm sorry. It is Lamafreya, I meant to say. Why did she get Malchus? Mishum the Katani Seifa, meaning there was no Afaras Habal. That's why she gets Malchus. You'll ask me, so what was the Chiddush of the Reisha? And the Reisha is only a sedgeway as an introduction to the Seifa. Mishum the Katani Seifa, Hefer La Baila, Vehilo Yada'a, Vaisa Shosa Yayin Umitama Lemesim, Einasofegas Esar Boim. She doesn't get Malchus, even though she thought that she was violating an Isur Torah. In her mind, she didn't know about the Hafar of the Baal, and she violated deliberately the Mezid, the Isurei Nazirus. Nevertheless, this is not considered an Isur. And this is called Iskavin Lechel Basa Chazir V'Ola B'Yoda Basa Tleh. Now again, she had a machshava rod, she needs kapara for hu yislach lo, but it's not a chiyuv malchus because there was no avera, because the Baal was meifim. Now this is the opinion of Tanakama. Rabbi Yehuda says that she gets makas mardus derabbanon based on her machshava. Is now on the top of Chav Beis, and with this we'll conclude. Once he's mechadish in the Sefer that according to Tanakam she doesn't get Malchus at all, not even Malchus Mardus against Rabbi Yehuda, Tani Nami Reisha Sofeges, he tells you in the Reisha that if the Baal was not made for her Nazirus, then she gets Malchus Arboim, even though again there's no Chidush whatsoever here, but it's an introduction to the Sefer. Okay then, so this is where we'll stop for today. And I wish you a great day. Thank you so much.